Welcome to today's live presentation of Apples to Oranges, comparing top webinar conferencing software. Audio for this event will be broadcasted through your computer speakers. If you would like the option to dial in to listen, please call 1-877-201-7923. Today's presentation is hosted inside an Adobe Connect virtual meeting room with integrated AudioOne audio conferencing. We invite you to learn more about hosting your own events with MeetingOne's tailored conferencing solutions during a brief Adobe Connect demo to follow the conclusion of this presentation. If you have requests to see specific functions inside Adobe Connect, we invite you to save them for this open discussion demo with our product expert. We're very delighted that you have joined us today, and we hope that you enjoy the live presentation with our host, David Smith of Virtual Gurus. Welcome, David, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you very much. Look, it's an absolute pleasure. And it's always a pleasure to actually be in a webinar with folks from everywhere in the world. I mean, as I look at it, Cleveland, Ohio, Portland, Oregon, Minnesota, Denver, Colorado, obviously home to MeetingOne. And it's quite funny because 18 hours ago, I was in Washington, D.C., actually on business. And Hans van der Linden from Amsterdam. Good to see you on board, Hans. So delighted to have each and every single one of you on board in this session. You know, and as we look at apples v. oranges, comparing top web conferencing software, what we're going to be doing here is looking at what should a web conferencing software platform actually have in terms of what are the most useful functions and features. You know, what are the critical elements that we think and we believe that every platform should have that helps us to provide a great user experience. You know, I mean, if we think about it, we can move our meetings online, or we can deliver presentations online, or we can actually deliver training online. And I noticed down in the final poll there, many of you have said we're using it for all sorts of different purposes. And when we do that, of course, it's the user experience, both for us as facilitators and meeting hosts, as well as for our learners, that actually give a certain flavor or a certain feeling about the actual event itself. So in today's event, I want to share that with you. I want to set an understanding with you that sometimes, depending on the platform you're going to use, you're going to limit or you're going to handcuff yourself into the experience. And our goal at Virtual Gurus is really to help organizations to make the best use of these platforms and technologies. You know, in terms of today, I'm going to be asking you at moments just to reflect and say, is this something that you're also doing? Is it something you've also experienced? And we're going to use the actual feedback icons at the very top of the screen. So if you go to the very top of the actual screen itself, you'll see an icon, looks like a fellow or person holding their hand up. If you click on that, and go ahead, everyone click on it, just make sure that we actually can, see those hands going up. Then clearly in the attendee panel that we can see that you've all responded in that way, and that's great. I just really want to get a sense of when we're talking about certain elements and features and facts around the actual platforms, that it's something that you're saying, yeah, we agree to that, or we're using that, or we're having those challenges. In terms of, you know, my experience, I actually got introduced back in 2008 into using web conferencing platforms. I'm going to say it in earnest. I got kind of thrown into the deep end. I was working with a sales training company, providing sales training, and we had a client, which was Cisco, and we delivered training to 10,000 of their salespeople, 2,500 of their managers in a 3-month period. And I've got to confess, that was a bit of a baptism of fire, but it was something that ignited a passion in me, something that really transformed the way that I wanted to look at how we help organizations to use these web conferencing technologies. And since that 2008 experience, I've pretty much been working with thousands of individuals across the world, helping them to make better sense of virtual meetings or virtual classrooms, designing for virtual classroom, training people to deliver virtual classrooms more effectively. And if I think about my current role, and yes, Virtual Gurus, we're about helping others use these platforms, I currently, on a day-to-day basis, probably using 5 platforms. You know, and you can see them up here on screen, the Adobe Connect platforms, the WebEx, Skype for Business, the GoTo family, and Zoom. But I'm using them all for different reasons and different use cases. And one of the things that I see often is quite challenging, and it's going to form basically the crux of our actual webinar today, is that folks tend to actually have one platform, and that platform is designed for a certain use, and we're using it for everything. And all that's going to do is kind of compromise a little about what we can do, how we can use it, and what we can use. If I take you back in time a little and get you thinking about how these tools actually evolved, so we're talking about whether it's GoToMeeting or whether it's Adobe Connect or whether it's, WebEx, doesn't matter what it is. They actually all came from essentially what were text-based live communication channels. If we go back very much to the late 80s, the advent of the internet coming alive, we had live chat facilities through the IRC channel. Individuals were able to actually, on a computer, chat independently, and that kind of made its way into instant messaging tools. So we've now got things like Facebook Messenger, we've got, Snapchat and the likes of it. Those tools they were the precursor to actually what in the late 90s became the true web conferencing platforms, which the first of all was Starlight Networks. And when we look at it today, the choice is amazing. It's huge. Organizations often are being thought, well, I just need a web conferencing platform, don't I? I just need something that I'm going to use to help my people to communicate, to connect, or maybe to collaborate. And, it's right to say that a virtual event can actually be held in any one number of X web conferencing or unified communication platforms. Because when you actually look at these tools, they've all been designed with certain features in mind. I mean, you take something like Skype for Business. It came from Microsoft Live. It came from Microsoft Link. Before that was Microsoft Live Meeting. Before that was Microsoft Windows Communicator. All about unified communication as a tool. But I guess a lot of organizations are now actually using Skype for Business to deliver virtual classroom training. Go ahead and just raise your hand for me if that's familiar for you. If you've been told by your organization you've probably got Office 365, as a result, depending on your license, you've probably got Skype for Business. So suddenly Skype for Business is your default web conferencing tool. And look, I get it. I'm a Scotsman. We tend to be some of the most frugal nation on earth. And if you're getting a platform bundled into something that you already pay for as a business, of course it makes economic sense for you to actually take advantage of that. But during the course of today's event, what I want to highlight and pinpoint to you is that if you go with something that is okay, then technically your experience, your learner experience is going to be okay. It's not going to be ideal. And it's generally about getting the right tool for the right job that you want to perform. As we go through the session, definitely want to pick up on as many questions as you give me, so get those coming in. You can ask questions on the Q&A panel on the left-hand side. But if we think about it, why do brands exist? Whether we're talking about web conferencing platforms or mobile devices or tablets, brands exist, and they exist for a reason. Let's step away from our web conference and our technology world for a second and step into the world of motorbikes and motor vehicles. If you think about it, there's so many different brands, whether we're looking at something like Chevrolet and Ford, or right through to Bentley and Audi and Ferrari, or Harley-Davidson, Suzuki, Yamaha. They all exist. They're all different platforms that different companies have created. And the real core to that is that often they're created for multiple reasons. So what you may actually find is you've got this whole sense of, the brand's created more because of a prestige element to it. It might be more because that brand wants to provide much more powerful or much more luxurious vehicles. It might be a particular brand tends to be more highly featured in terms of their actual product set. And definitely when we actually move into things like Bentleys and Ferraris and the very top edge, those cars are different, but if you think about it, any car is going to move you from A to B. The purpose of a motor vehicle is to get you to move from one place to another. It's transport. But every single car will give you a very different driving experience and journey. And it's the same for your passengers. And that's exactly the same with these web conferencing platforms. You know, when we actually look at it, we can look at it from the point of view that the reason people buy cars is they buy them for different purposes, different types of vehicle they're buying. You know, if you may actually think, well, okay, I live in the city, I don't need a big luxury car. I'm going to spend a lot of time in traffic. I need to park it. So I might want to get something that's a little bit more efficient and compact. You might be a bit more outdoorsy, so you might want something a little bit more strong, multifunctional. You might be someone that wants something it's fast and furious or fast and luxurious in this instance. And those, again, I can see that platforms, the web conference platforms, can be seen in the same way. You know, yes, Skype for Business may actually be seen as something that's maybe a little bit more efficient and compact. But just in the same way in terms of you driving a vehicle, you're not always going to want and need the four-wheel drive pickup truck. But if that's all you've got, then that's going to shape your driving experience. And likewise, in virtual events, the platform that you select, or that's selected for you in a lot of instances, it's going to shape the experience. And, you know, as long as it's featured in the right way, that's great. But it is going to make a big difference. So let's start talking about these platforms. Let's start looking at them and truly understanding in terms of how do they differ. And the first thing, of course, is that there are two very distinct camps in terms of the difference between the platforms themselves. There's a group of those products that are out there are what we would call screen share based. They work by you, the presenter, sharing your screen with the audience versus what we call the platform-based tools, which is where there's a portal that you actually upload slides into. So screen share, screen share, something like GoToMeeting, something like Zoom, you know, where you've actually got to share what's on your screen in order to get everyone on the same page. Platform-based, that's things like WebEx, it's Adobe Connect. You know, everything that we've got loaded up into this Adobe Connect session is sitting in the cloud. And one of the key reasons, and again, this may be something that you don't even know, but one of the key reasons for moving more towards a platform-based platform rather than a screen share platform is that on screen share, unfortunately, we've got the little pop-ups that come up and bite. And again, let me go ahead, ask you to just give me a hand raise if you've experienced it. We've been in a virtual session, somebody's using screen share, and something pops up on screen. It might not be appropriate, it might be sensitive information, it might be information that you didn't want to share with the actual audience, but because they're using screen share, it's popped up there. It's a common problem. If I'm using a platform-based platform, I don't have those challenges. There's no way the pop-up can actually be shown unless I'm using screen share within that platform. The other thing to actually think about is if I have a platform-based system like Adobe Connect and I've loaded up my slides, and let's say suddenly, and you know, I'm here in the UK at the moment, there's quite a heavy storm going on, thunder and lightning outside. What if that tripped my electricity out? This webinar would have to finish if I was using screen share and I was sharing my screen. But if I'm using a platform-based tool and the electricity tripped out, and I had this happen on an Adobe webinar a number of years back, I just turned around, I was able to actually dial back in using my cell phone and just ask the producer, in this instance you heard from Luke at the top of this call, and just ask that person to actually just move the slides. I could talk to the slides without actually having to see them. And that's, again, one of the distinct advantages of looking at it that way. For those of you that are actually starting to consider what platform to go with, starting to do the kind of research and evaluation about which products, what products to compare, let me give you a bit of a heads up, because one of the things that I find extremely challenging for individuals and organizations that are looking to step into this is that there's often comparison websites or, you know, vendors are making comparisons, and the name of the feature sounds similar, or the label that's being used the same, but the way in which they perform is different. And there's a number of different ways there. But think about it, and I'm going to stay with our car analogy. And you may have guessed in a past life I did actually work within the automotive industry. I worked with Mercedes and Audi. And I do like cars. But if you think about it in terms of gear shifts, you have an automatic gear shift or a stick shift, as you call it in the US, or a manual gearbox, as we call it here in the UK or in Europe. And if we think about it, the functionality is still there. Those two different types of gear shift do exactly the same job. They shift gears. They actually allow the car to change up and change down the gear. One does it automatically. One, you've actually got to push that lever back and forth. So on the surface, we could turn around and say that every vehicle, pretty much on the planet, all have gear shifts. Just in the same way that if you go out to something like the Wikipedia website and you go to the comparison of web conferencing software, you'll see that they've got a huge list of all of those different web conferencing platforms. And you may get something like Breakout Rooms, for instance. You know, now, again, go ahead. Give me a raise hand. Everyone, or give me a green check if you're familiar with what I mean by Breakout Rooms, red X if you're not. So where that little raised hand was, if you actually drop down the little arrow to the right, you can do a green check, you can do a red X. So I'm using expressions here. I don't want to assume that you know what I'm talking about. Some of you may actually be looking at moving into using web conferencing for the very first time. So I can see we've got several red X's there. So when I talk about breakouts, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit more detail in a second, but a breakout room, if you think about it in the face-to-face training environment, we often ask people to go into small groups. So we may take an audience of 16, break them up into 4 groups of 4, set them a task or activity, ask them to go off and do something. Well, we can replicate that in what we call breakout rooms within the actual virtual platforms. But those screen sharing platforms will not allow you to do a breakout room share. There's no way of actually breaking up that single screen share into 4 views. The platform vendors can, so Adobe Connect, WebEx. But there's some of the vendors that are on the circuit, they'll actually provide, yes, we've got breakout rooms, and what they're actually talking about is they're providing a collaboration space. It's not quite the same. It's a bit like me saying, yeah, I'll give you a gearbox, but this one's got 5-speed, that one's got 7-speed, this one's automatic, and that one's manual. So be very cautious when you're actually comparing the product features. Are you getting apples and apples? Are you comparing apples to apples, or are you actually in danger of comparing apples to oranges? Just spotting as a question come in there, I'm going to pick that up. Lots of times you end up using screen share even in a platform tool because you need to do a live demo of a system or are troubleshooting a live system. That question came, or that comment came in from Brian. And Brian, you're absolutely right. One thing I would say to you, and definitely having used these web conference platforms for the last 10 years, is please make sure that if you are going to be using screen sharing, or you're asking someone else to do screen sharing, ask them to do the housekeeping piece of shutting down of all the other applications that might be running in the background that are not necessary for the actual event that you're going to run. That way nothing's going to pop up. There's not going to be any red herrings that suddenly come up on screen. And if you think about it, in today's business world, we might have instant messaging tools where some of our colleagues might want to actually suddenly take the mickey a little out of the fact that your sports team lost at the weekend, or may actually put something there that isn't quite the thing you maybe want to actually flash up on screen in front of a presentation that you're doing with a client. So definitely the screen share is a fantastic tool for actually, as you say, demonstrating something that's not on the learner audience or the participant audience's computer, but there's some housekeeping that we need to take care of to make that work. So the features aren't necessarily the same, and one of the things that I would do is let's take a look in terms of the difference between breakout rooms on Adobe Connect and something like WebEx. How many of you are actually using WebEx? Go ahead and raise your hand if you're using WebEx and breakout rooms in WebEx Training Center for that matter. So I can see we've got Stacy, we've got Clarence, we've got Sheila, and I've got to confess, breakout rooms for me are one of the great features of these web platforms. You'll tend to use them more in virtual classroom delivery. It's not necessarily something you'd actually use in a virtual meeting or a virtual presentation. Having said that, you might in a virtual meeting context. But think about it this way, and Stacey, Clarence, and Sheila, you're definitely going to relate to this. If you're using WebEx to actually do your delivery, you want to do a breakout room, you've got to wait till the breakout room starts before you can start loading content. And this is really where, as I say, for us, a large part of what we do as a business is work with clients to understand the differences between some of these platforms before they buy them. Or if they're actually looking to do a certain task and activity, they need to know that what platform is going to be able to support them to do that. So WebEx Training Center, you want to do breakout rooms, you've got to load the content at that point in time. So what you've now got to do is, let's say you've got 4 breakout rooms. You've got to go into each of those 4 rooms and load that content individually. That's losing time from the actual session. Something like Adobe Connect or the other platforms that will actually allow breakout rooms to be built in advance means that you can actually populate the content, put it in, and then turn around and move people across. And I'll show you a little bit more about how we do that in just a moment. But you maybe turn around and say, well, hang on, David, surely breakouts are breakouts, and polls are polls, and chat is chat. But what we have found over the years, the 10 years that we've been helping organizations make better sense of using these technologies, particularly in the field of virtual classroom, is that if the feature set is not there, it can handcuff the actual delivery. It can handcuff the design. If you're having to use a web conferencing platform that does not have breakout rooms to actually design your learning, you can only work with group discussion. You can only work with the group as a whole. So you're limited in what you can actually do. And we've seen it time and time again. And what actually happens is you end up where the event that you want to create has some form of compromise as it has to fit into what the platform is able to support you to do. And very much, I've said many, many times in the past, any event could be run in any platform. What will differ is the experience, it's the design, it's what you can do and what you can't do. I'm going to pause a sec. Luke, do we have any questions we want to pick up on?
Just as a reminder to our participants, if you would like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A pod that is in the left side of the screen that is just below David's picture underneath the webcam. But so far, I do not see that there are any other questions that have come in.
Okay, great. So let's, my apologies, let's switch gears a little. See, I'm staying with that automotive. And let's look at what, for us, we believe are the critical elements, the critical feature sets that have to be in your web conferencing software in order for you to be able to deliver great online sessions. And if you think about it, we're talking about helping our people to move from doing events that have been done very traditionally in the face-to-face world, a world in which we're very comfortable with, we know what we're doing, we know what tools we can rely on, and move that online. So if we think about it here in terms of, whether what we're actually doing is looking to share some information or to present information, we're looking to capture notes, we're asking people to join on mobile, it could be that we're actually going to engage in chat. We could start thinking about those different elements and thinking about them from the point of view of how do they work in the virtual world? How do they happen in the web conferencing? And really, and this is going to show you as a diagram of Adobe Connect, what we can think about is the visual element is that people can join using webcam. You're seeing me live on webcam right now. So we can actually have all of our people that we want on the actual event in webcam. You're seeing things like the attendee list. There's a chat panel. Again, some of the things that I think we can do virtually, we can do so much better than we can do face-to-face. If you think about it, I've got so many different ways of interacting with you now here virtually that I don't have face-to-face. I can get everyone speaking at once in a text way by asking you all to put a response in the chat. I've got a Q&A panel that's there, and I've got a question from Stacey and one from Jeff we're going to pick up on in just a second. But, you know, from a design perspective, from a facilitation perspective, we know that we can actually take those face-to-face events and make them engaging. But it doesn't just happen. So, again, if you've been on a webinar with us in the past, you'll know that we're huge fans of giving you lots of good takeaways and value add. It's not just you sitting here for the course of an hour and listening to someone. So at the very bottom there, click on the Get It. You can actually download 5 ways to make virtual training as effective as face-to-face. You'll be able to pick that up. So I'm going to pick up on the question from Stacey. What were your considerations in choosing Adobe Connect for today? You know, Stacey, I'm going to park that question for a second because part of the presentation actually is going to share with you, you know, our thoughts around Adobe Connect. But I mean, obviously, MeetingOne are actually sponsoring the event, and Adobe Connect is their platform. Jeff, what is your take on video streaming quality? Our content is moving towards more live video and less PowerPoint. You know, Jeff, I've got to confess, for me, one of the things about moving our face-to-face events into virtual events, if we don't use the webcam, often we're limiting it to a conference call with visual slides. You know, we're pushing a PowerPoint slide deck, or we're using a presentation to actually backdrop the conversation or to guide the people in the meeting, etc. And we are seeing more and more organizations using video. You know, I know that within our business we use video conferencing quite often. You know, and the beauty is in Adobe Connect we can actually have pretty much, you know, if we're having a virtual meeting and there's maybe 6 of us, we can just put the 6 webcams up on screen. There's no real issue or no real challenge to that. And that's great, you know, because sometimes actually what you do want to do is just see the people that you're actually communicating with. There's no need for any backdrop of visuals. There's no need for any whiteboarding. But again, one of the attractions I've got for something like Adobe Connect is I can have multiple screens, multiple layouts. I can actually have the webcams up on screen at the same time as having a note pod up there. One of the great things about Adobe Connect is that you have a blank canvas to start with, and you put on that canvas what you want. We'll share with you a little bit later what that actually looks like. But I think that actually, video is definitely one of the things we need to be considering and using going forward. You have to forgive me. One of the joys of traveling often means that you actually pick up colds, and I have picked up colds. I've flown back from the States this week. You know, great timing there in terms of you asking about video, but think also about from the point of view, how is your audio actually going to be provided? You know, a lot of these platforms don't come out of the box with the audio already there. The audio tends to be a separate service. It gets integrated, and a lot of that happens quite easily, no problem. But you've got to think from the point of view of how's the audio being provided for the virtual event. It's one component of it. There's the visual, there's also very much the audio. So is it being provided using VoIP, voice over IP, where you can actually use a computer headset? Individuals can actually sit and listen to it through using computer speakers as we're doing in this. Or is it using VoIP and phone, which is what we're doing here? You know, the audio is being broadcast through your computer speakers, but I'm actually on a phone headset. I tend to prefer being on a phone headset because I know the quality is going to be higher. And the quality in any virtual event, audio-wise, can vary tremendously. You know, again, there's an element of making sure that people have done the housekeeping of setting up their audio properly, but importantly, making sure that they're actually in a nice audio environment. You know, one of the things that we see so often is that folks actually join virtual events and they're in an open plan, busy, distracting audio environment, noisy background and colleagues, and they're expecting to turn up into a virtual meeting and actually contribute. And there's so much extraneous noise happening in the background, that it's distracting, you know, and I'm pretty certain, and, you know, Brittany, I'm just going to ask you, or Brittany, Luke, can you just grab the video conference call in real life from Tripp and Tyler? Because that's a great way to actually reinforce the fact that, you know, so very, very often what we actually have is the little impact factors that our audience bring to the session, you know, in terms of whether they've taken the right time, whether they've actually sought out the right environment, where they're actually joining us from, all makes an impact, you know, and this particular video that we're going to share with you, which is out there on YouTube, is Tripp and Tyler, and they actually do a bit of a parody about a conference call in real life. So we're going to get the team, again, this is one of the things that I love about Adobe Connect. I've asked the team in a very short moment just to actually share that video to you. If you click on that link and click Browse to, it'll open up in your web browser. Don't go off and look at it right now, but keep it open, and we'll come back to my session, and then what we can do is you can grab that a little bit later. But think about it from the audio experience. If your audience cannot actually either access the virtual classroom room or the web conference room or get a good quality audio, it's almost, you may as well shut the door for them. It's not a great experience for them. It's not a great experience for you. And you definitely don't want that to be something that you go long term with. So thinking about some of these tools, and definitely as I think to that, some of these actual tools work in very similar ways, but also in very different ways. We've got the chat tool. You know, the chat tool is, go back to the history of web conferencing, and we had instant messaging tools. So it's instant messaging live here within the app, or within the actual platform. And as you can see, you know, we've been sending messages back and forth to you as we go along, you know, in terms of right at the very beginning, where were you dialing in from, you know, let us know where you're calling in from. And the chat in most platforms will tend to either be something that's private, something that's public first and foremost, so everyone is getting to see that. It's one chat. A lot of the platforms then do support this private chat, and that's great for individuals being able to communicate behind the scenes or provide, share technical challenges that they're having, or I'm having to, you know, one of the obvious ones people actually tend to use it for is, I have to drop off the call in 20 minutes, just giving people a little bit of an advanced notification. Here within Adobe Connect, one of the great features is we can actually put up multiple chat pods. You know, there's no limitation other than the screen space that you've got of how many of these different pods or windows you can actually put up there, or what combination of them you can. You know, it really is, there's a huge difference there. And, you know, these, I find the chat great, and it's something that I also find mixed in terms of how people use chat within any web platform. This is not just Adobe Connect. Because the chat tool allows us to do things so much quicker, so much more efficiently than maybe we would do face-to-face. You know, and you know, when we actually come face-to-face or bring our face-to-face events into virtual, one of the things that we often do is we suddenly take the same behaviors that we do face-to-face and make it happen in the virtual world. So listen to what I'm going to share with you, and then go ahead, green check if you say, yes, this is how you're doing it, red X if you disagree with it. So when you do introductions and you're in a virtual event, green check if what you're doing is saying, okay, let's hear from David first, and so David speaks out, then it's Terry that will speak out, then it's Luke, then it's Brittany, then it's Alicia, and then it's Bill. So if that's your experience of doing introductions in the virtual event, go ahead and give me a green check. Because traditionally what people will do is take the behaviors they've done face-to-face and make them the same in virtual. The beauty is that using the chat function, and I can see several of you actually giving us the green check there, using the chat function, I can turn around, and I do this on almost every virtual event, I'll turn around and say, okay, go ahead in chat, next 90 seconds, let us know where you're dialing in from. I don't need everyone to stand up and actually say, oh, I'm David and this is where I'm from. Depends on your event purpose, you may, but you don't need to do it that way all the time. Another key tool I love to pieces is having these whiteboards and annotation tools. You know, again, there are different labels out there. Different companies are using different labels. Is it a whiteboard? Is it a screen? Is it annotations? But it's essentially, it's the ability for us to actually either draw on screen or actually brainstorm. We can put imagery up there. You know, it's great for actually giving people an anonymous way of actually responding in the session. And the beauty with it is that, again, one of the things to consider is the platform that you're using when the animations are actually completed by the actual audience, are they fixed on screen? You know, WebEx is a good example there. If you actually type on screen on a WebEx, then what's actually naturally going to happen is if somebody else types over the top of what I've typed, the two meld together, and it looks quite disconcerting. Whereas in Adobe Connect, what we can actually do is take, it's object-oriented, so we can actually move them around. Polls or surveys, again, that we've got this challenge with labels in the actual industry. You've seen a couple of the polls and surveys that we've actually got here within the Adobe platform. You've done a few of those already. They tend to either be multiple choice, single answer, or multiple answer, and open answer as well. And you saw that right at the very beginning of our actual session. And they're great because what it actually allows you to do is get data from the actual audience. You know, and again, one of the things that we talk about when we're working with our clients is getting them to think beyond how they actually, beyond the functionality of the tool and how to use the tool. So for instance, if I wanted to ask a question of you as an audience and get a yes or no response, a tool, using the poll is a little bit laborious. You know, if I just need a yes/no response, why don't I just use the feedback icons at the top and ask you to give me a green check, red X? You know, it gives me the same. You would use the polls if what you want to do is to collate responses and get the ability to actually capture what those responses are from the actual audience itself. So what we're actually going to do here very quickly, you see there's 5 polls up here on screen. And again, this is part of that multi-poll layout or multiple pod layout that we've actually got as a feature set within Adobe Connect. And, you know, again, often what we find is clients maybe aren't aware that, oh, I can do this. I'm using Adobe Connect, but I can put multiple pods on screen. I didn't know I could do that. So if you're using the web conferencing platforms for these kinds of events, we're just going to pause in this window for a second. Well, a little bit more than a second, for about a minute, and see what we're doing. Remember, if you do have any questions, doesn't matter what those questions are and how they actually are, go ahead and put them in the Q&A panel for me. We'll pick them up as we go along. We've got a live demo that you can move into at the very end, but equally I'll stay on as long as we can to answer as many of those questions as you got. So wanting to get a flavor for, and seeing here, you know, pretty much most people using the same tool for all types of event. And part of that might be necessity. Part of that might be because of economics and cost. But think about it, each event that you perform, whether it's a virtual meeting, a virtual presentation, a marketing webinar like this, or a virtual classroom, technically they need a different tool set. And if you're using one tool all the time, chances you might just not use all of the features within that actual platform. And great to see who selected the web conferencing platform that you did. 11 of you saying there I did. 3 of you the IT department. Several of you unsure. You know, one of the things that we have seen historically is IT department actually kind of being those that select the tool, and then everyone's just got to use it. And I know I've spent time with a lot of good clients where their virtual classroom design has been compromised because they've gone with a specific platform and it doesn't have the breakout functionality, or it has the limitations in terms of it's got to be loaded up in advance. Okay, so you can imagine polls. The final tool we're going to talk about here, and then we're going to look into some reasons why we select certain tools, is around breakout rooms. You know, breakout rooms, we do this activity in the face-to-face environment where we take larger groups, we break them down into small groups and give them a task. We give them an activity. We give them a discussion. We tell them to go and role play or run scenarios. And the great thing is we can do that in virtual classrooms as well, or virtual web conferencing tools as well. So we can actually take our audience. Our audience might be 16, it might be 10, it might be however. We can create various breakout sessions, and then we can move our people across. And what actually happens is visually for that audience, they move into either a room that's got the same content, so everyone can be working on the same activity, or we might have loaded up different content, so each group's going to work on a different activity and then report back. You know, again, doesn't really matter because depending on what kind of event you want to run, it will actually determine on what you're actually going to use in terms of features. But the key to this is breakouts when you're selecting a platform is, do you actually have to wait to actually start the breakouts before you can load that content, or can it be loaded when the in advance? Final one, handouts. Again, a lot of these platforms will support some form of file transfer, so that what can actually happen is that people can actually get access to a particular layout, or a particular job aid, or a particular piece of information, status, reports, whatever it may be. And it's a little bit like what we can actually do is say, okay, I didn't want you to get this before, but I do want you to access it now. And what you can see here is, for those of you that are using Adobe Connect, if you click on that actual file share name, the DIY Adobe Connect Layouts worksheet, and then click download, you can actually download that for use in terms of how to set up these different layouts when you're actually using Adobe Connect. Okay, Karen, question from you, or a comment. We're planning to offer virtual attendance for a conference of 570 live attendees. I have a few questions. I might answer one now and capture the list later. Is there any reason we would not want remote users to participate in a live session? Would you encourage all attendees live and virtual to submit questions via the chat tool versus a stand-up mic? Yeah, I mean, definitely, when you've got an audience like 570 people attending, if they're actually all dispersed around the globe or outside of a single room, you know, the only way you can control the amount of communication that's coming in is going to be using something like I wouldn't say the chat tool necessarily, probably more the Q&A tool, if your platform has Q&A. The Q&A tool allows questions to be asked and responded to in a very structured way. If you think about it, if we actually use the chat pod or a chat tool, in that chat tool you have everything from people saying hello and saying, you know, asking questions and passing comments and sharing ideas, and those questions that you want to respond to may actually get lost in amongst all of that. So I think it's key that, again, use the tool that's designed for that purpose, or rather the tool set that's designed for that purpose. So in that particular instance, it would be Q&A. What you can then actually do is actually assign people, and we've got it today in our session. I'm not answering every question that's there. There's additional questions that are coming out, but there's a team of people with Luke and Brittany and Abby and Joel who are actually assigned questions, and they can respond to the actual audience while I'm presenting the actual content that we're talking about. You know, I said earlier that the platform can help to shape or help to handcuff the actual user experience. And for us at Virtual Gurus, it's not just about the technology itself. You know, it's making sure that everyone that's using the tool set, whether that's the learner audience or the meeting hosts or the meeting attendees, they know how to use the platform. If you think about it, you've got this essence of we're asking people to come into a different environment, one that maybe they're not familiar with. And it's a little bit like our friend here on the right, turning up to a golf game, never having played golf in his life, and thinking, what do I need to have with me? There's a whole sense of we bring people into these platforms, and they don't know what they don't know. If you've not oriented them to it, if they've not seen the platform before, how on earth can we expect them to actually connect, communicate, and collaborate with us in a good way if they're suddenly thinking, well, what do I do? Where do I press? What should I be doing? What happens if I press this? What happens if I select that? So what I wanted to do is just give you a bit of a highlight that from a virtual guru's perspective, we have a competency model that helps organizations to look at 3 key areas to develop their people and actually being competent in using these technologies. And whether you work with us or not, I wanted to just give you a very brief flavor in that there are 3 areas that you want to be very much focusing on. First and foremost, there's making sure that the individual, the audience, knows how to use the platform. It's what we call platform fluency. If it's a meeting host or a presenter, they need to know how the platform works and functions, which tools to use and at which time. There's then what we actually call virtual presence. And this is where the way in which you turn up in the virtual event itself, the way you project, the way you use your voice, the way you engage with that invisible audience. And then there's the way that you think out the actual event. Now, if you think about it from a virtual meeting perspective, that's going to have a much simpler choreography than, say, for instance, a virtual classroom event. But if you think about it from the point of view that we need to know the platform, we need to think about how we are in the platform, and we think about how we map out the event, think about it in those contexts, you'll start moving into much better and much stronger in terms of those virtual events that we design and deliver. Now, Stacey, you actually turned around and asked what were our considerations in choosing Adobe Connect for today. In Virtual Gurus and in my past life, I've used pretty much most platforms. And I have to confess that for me and Virtual Gurus, our platform of choice is Adobe Connect. And there's a lot of great reasons for that. Primarily, we've already covered most of those in terms of they have that critical tool set, in terms of having chat, having whiteboards, having polls, having breakout rooms. But there's 10 other reasons that I want to share with you and just go through briefly as an audience. What are the top reasons why we select Adobe Connect as our platform of choice? The first and foremost, and again, this is starting to get where the core differences are between Adobe Connect and maybe other platforms. The first and foremost is that in Adobe Connect, the room that you create is what we call a perpetual room. That is that you can create the room, and once you've created it, it's the closest thing you've got to having a physical training room. So you can see down here on the bottom on the screen, we've got a whole host of different rooms listed here. And every time I want to click on that room and then go into it, all the content that I've created is still there, unless I've cleaned it, unless I've moved it out. I can close and reopen that room as many times as I want. I can practice in that room. I could be bringing people in, co-presenters. We could be running through our content. And as a result, we're able to be much more practiced, much more prepared. And again, this is one of the key things in terms of the way these different platforms work. Instead of me as a facilitator, as a presenter, having to do all of this right before we actually launch the event, we built this room out maybe over a week in advance. In fact, even longer than that. We've been doing dry runs around this entire webinar for probably about 4 weeks now. And we've had 3 or 4 meetings in this physical room, looking at what we actually need, looking and setting it up. That's one of the core things about Adobe Connect. And if you're running sessions, whether it's virtual meetings or virtual events where you've got a repetition, then think about having a tool that supports that. Think about having a tool that actually makes it easier for your people to do the job. And what you can do is you can repeat and copy the room without having to set it up each and every time. You know, virtual classrooms, if you're actually delivering the same session but to different audiences, and it's all in the same language, the beauty of something like a platform like this is you set it up once, it's clean it down once, it's able to be delivered. The second reason for us is something that's classed as multiple rooms. You know, we don't have one instance here in which we can actually use. We can set up a room for each and every single instance that we need. So it might be for different clients, it might be for different purposes, it might be for different reasons. We're not limited to the one room that we've actually got to use over and over and over again. So I can go in and I can set rooms up that have different names or different layouts, different purposes. I might have a room that I want to use for brainstorming. I might have a room that I want to use for video conferencing. So that when we all go into that video conference room, all the webcams actually are displayed all at once. One of the great things I love about Adobe Connect is the fact that we have what is called a customizable room link. So in our Adobe Connect platform as Virtual Gurus, every single platform link that we have is virtualgurus.adobeconnect.com/ and then whatever the room name is. So my personal meeting room is just called D Smith. You know, if we're actually having a brainstorm room, we could actually just have brainstorm. And I know immediately, well, to give you details to actually sign into that room, it's virtualgurus.adobeconnect.com/brainstorm /David Smith / whatever. Unlike some other platforms, you can see an example here of WebEx, can you imagine having to tell someone on the phone, well, can I ask you to navigate to this room number? Is it, you know, and giving them that 30, 40, 50-digit number, it's not going to work in the same way. You're going to confuse people. So it allows that sense of being able to remember, being able to repeat. Mentioned a little earlier there in terms of we can store content, it can be shared. So what we can actually do is almost like a filing cabinet of presentations and polls and layouts and everything else. We can store that on the server and pull it across and pull it into rooms. So we're not actually having to reload it each and every single time. And that's just, you know, again, it's about creating those efficiencies. One of the others for you, we can actually customize and brand here within Adobe Connect. You know, we can add our company colors to the virtual meeting rooms, to the login screen. We can personalize the backgrounds. You know, and again, you know, sometimes you may sort of think, well, do I need that? It's maybe not what you actually need, but it's great to have that as a feature set so that people, learners, meeting hosts, attendees, they know where you're going to. It's about keeping our branding going. Some of the tools that we actually think about is how do we know our audiences are working with us? How do we know they're not multitasking, that you're not switching off? Well, in the actual session itself, we've got attention tracking. And some of the other platforms have got the same on paper. You know, WebEx, for instance, I'm trying to remember the names of those that actually were on WebEx. You know, WebEx have got an attentiveness meter, except there's a little bit of a problem there. The attentive meter actually operates and functions on, is the WebEx screen the actual live window or not? So if you're actually using OneNote to capture your notes or Evernote, it's going to throw up a trigger. You know, within Adobe Connect, we've got what we call the engagement dashboard. It gives a lot more detail. It's actually monitoring things like every time you actually click in and out of the room, the number of polls that you're responding to, the amount of time that you're actually spending putting in content around the chat pod, etc. We spoke about creating layouts, multiple views. Within the platforms themselves, a lot of them you end up getting a very static view. So it's not something that you can actually change and manipulate and move around. Adobe Connect allows us to create multiple layouts throughout the meeting. Each of these different pods we can use in different ways. So the beauty is that you can actually create a very visual and dynamic user experience. It doesn't always have to be the same look, the same feel. move to reason 8. These are some of the really fun pieces that I really love. You may have noticed right at the very beginning of the session, we actually added another poll into the actual session, just ad hoc. I realized, well, it would be great if we asked this question as well. So you've got what we call a presenter-only area. You can see on the screen here, on this right-hand side, you see a sort of black section. And that's kind of holding area. And if you think about creating a performance when you're doing one of these virtual events, it's kind of where you would have your props area. So I can turn around and, I'm going to just pull on something which is here, but it's just a clock. But I've got that held off to the side. I can pull that and bring that onto screen and bring it off a screen as I want to. So I can make those changes, those layouts, those adaptations as we're going along. We have 2 more reasons to share with you, and then we'll pick up on the final questions. There's preparation mode. Sometimes you need to adapt content on the fly. There's a need to actually step in and do things and think, oh no, I didn't load that deck. I'm going to need that deck for that conversation, that presentation in the next 5 minutes. What am I going to do? In some of the other platforms, one person has the ball. I guess you know which one I'm talking about in terms of WebEx. So if you've got the ball, you're loading the content. No one else can load the content while that's the case. So you either have to actually pass the ball back to do that. Within prepare mode, I could go in, or one of the team could go in, load that other slide deck that we need behind the scenes while we're still presenting, and then it's there ready for me. I don't have to worry about do I have to pause the virtual event to make that happen before it actually comes out. And then the final piece I wanted to share with you is probably what I would say is one of the strong things, but also one of the things that so many individuals are now actually looking for. If you think about within our organizations, more and more we're being seen to be mobile. Now by that, what I mean is that more and more we're actually out and about. We might be out with clients. We might be stuck in traffic. There's a need for us to actually attend that virtual event. And what you're going to see here, and because I'm sharing my share, it's sharing it multiple times. But what you're seeing here is my iPad view. I've actually logged in with the iPad. You can see here that if I wanted to, I can raise my hand, I can agree, disagree. I can actually look at the particular slide that's actually being viewed. I can look at the overall layout. As a presenter, I can actually manage the actual event from the actual iPad. So I can move us to different layouts, as you can see here. I can switch on the meeting camera. I can change the meeting audio. I can invite people. I love the fact that Adobe Connect's mobile app, which works both in terms of iPhone, iPod, it works on tablet, it works on smartphone, is just brilliant from that point of view. It's just superb. So what I wanted to do is to share with you, there are certain components in your web conferencing platform that we believe you certainly should have. They're very bare minimum. But unfortunately, because of different brands, because of different vendors, you are going to get tripped up a little along the ways in terms of same labels being applied to similar tools, but not quite being the same in terms of functionality. This webinar has all been about comparing apples to oranges. A web conferencing platform is a web conferencing platform is a web conferencing platform. But as you look across the different platforms, some of the labels might sound the same, some of the features might look the same, but the experience, the ability for you to design is going to be vastly different. I'm going to pause a second and just say, you've been listening to me for the last hour, but don't take my word for it. Adobe Connect has won Gartner's Magic Quadrant, or been named a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for the last 9 years running. That's how consistent they seem to be. Excuse me. And for me, it's a platform that is very close to our heart because it allows us to do the most. It's things like the way it handles video file. It's the way we can actually customize. You've got my details down in the bottom left. I'm going to pause a second and let Luke explain a little bit about the 5-minute demo that we're actually offering, and then we'll pick up on any final questions, Luke.
Great. Thank you very much, David. At this time, we will be opening up a brief live demo of Adobe Connect in another virtual room. We invite you to join us if you would like to see specific features in action, or if you'd like to learn more about hosting your own virtual meetings, classes, or webinars with Adobe Connect. There is a title card that is up where you can select Join the Live Session Now, or you can schedule a demo with a product expert. And after selecting that, and if you would like to, you can go ahead and you can join the session. But now I'd like to turn it back over to you, David, to answer any more questions that we may have that have come in. And just as a reminder to everyone who is attending and who would like to remain attending who is not attending the demo, please feel free to type in any questions in the Q&A pod just below the webcam.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Luke. So, look, I appreciate we're pretty much right at the end of our time. I've got 2 or 3 questions what I want to pick up on. If you haven't got time to stay on, you need to jump off to something else, you can see my email address down there in the bottom left corner. Please feel free to fire me an email and say, look, David, I had this question. I couldn't quite get you to answer it during the session because of time, whatever. Delighted to help out. You can also click on our website if you want to have a further look at how we support clients in using these. I want to go back to Karen's question. You know, you did talk about, would you encourage all attendees that are both live and virtual to submit questions via the chat tool versus a stand-up mic? I definitely would. You know, one of the things that I love about these technologies when we actually bring them to a face-to-face event is we end up with that sort of hybrid audience where we can actually bring the virtual into the face-to-face and we can bring the face-to-face into the virtual. The one thing I do tend to do when we run those kind of events, though, is keep the playing field level, so to speak. So I will turn around to everyone and say, look, if you want to provide us with a question, please, everyone, pull out a mobile device or pull out a laptop, or but ask the questions within the actual tool itself. There's some fantastic face-to-face tools you can use in an open forum that can actually link into stuff like this. It's brilliant in that sense. Tenora asked the question, is anyone using the GoTo training platform? You know, Tenora, the question pane is asking questions of us as an audience. I mean, look, the GoTo product is a great product. You know, this has not been, hopefully you've not seen it as being Adobe Connect is the best, everything else is not. You know, we've got to be mindful that everyone has a platform that they either choose or is chosen for them. And often what we have is organizations that have got to make the best of what they're using. As I said right at the very beginning, you can run a virtual event in any one of those web conferencing platforms. You can run a virtual event as something that's using screen sharing, like GoTo and Zoom, or something that's platform-based, like Adobe Connect or WebEx. So there are plenty of people out there actually using GoTo Training as a platform to deliver virtual classroom. And they're doing that very successfully. I think, like everything, the thing I would say to you is that when the platform has features or doesn't have features, you've got to know that in a lot more detail. You've then got to rethink how you actually physically design because of those potential compromises. Lisa, and apologies, I didn't see when the question came in. You said, would you say this is a big differentiator between Adobe Connect and WebEx? I'm going to suggest that that probably came in at the time we were talking about breakout rooms. And Lisa, if it was, you can just drop me a response to that in the chat. The perpetual room. Okay. Glad you corrected me. You stopped me going away in a different tangent. The perpetual room is definitely something I think is a big differentiator between WebEx and Adobe Connect. The WebEx platform, you can open up the event 30 minutes in advance of the actual start time, but you're only, that 30-minute window, which is the maximum amount of time you can actually open up the event in advance, other than actually starting it very early during the day, that's the only time for you and your facilitators, your meeting hosts, to load the content, to get the room ready. And I find, and my very first venture was in WebEx, going back 10 some years ago. We use WebEx very frequently. And I would say it puts a little bit more pressure on the delivery team, those that are actually running the virtual event themselves, because you have got that sense. If you've got a perpetual room, as I said earlier, I can go into that room at any point in time that I want to. I can load up the content, I can clean it down, I can change the layouts, and I think that is a big differential, particularly if you're running events where you're repeating those sessions. I think having a perpetual room which says, I load the content once, I run the session, I clean down the room, so I might remove the chat, the poll results, the annotations, and I'm ready to actually go and run the session all over again. That saves us time. And in a world where we're actually pressed on time, I think that's going to be a great thing. Okay, as I say, and Lisa, thank you very much. I mean, anything else that you want to pick up on, by all means, please drop me a question there in chat. I appreciate we're going, well, we're about 7 minutes beyond our actual official finishing time. You know, happy to stay on and answer any more. David Allen, thanks, most useful. Finally to have a feature-by-feature comparison. David, thank you very much. I'm glad you've enjoyed the event. I certainly have. It took a lot of brain work in terms of looking at, you know, all the different features and how they all differently compare. And in fairness, we came to the solution that we had in today's event, which is it's not about comparing one against the other. It's making sure you know what tool sets are almost like a critical tool set, and then how best we can actually move it forward. Excellent stuff. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, each and every single one of you, for joining us. I appreciate it's either going to be your morning, your afternoon, or your evening. So I'm going to say goodbye for now. I wish you a wonderful rest of your Thursday. The weekend is almost upon us, and I look forward to seeing another webinar pretty soon. Take care, everyone.